Lismore, Lismore, where the past is always present, where the past is present everywhere you go. Lismore, a special place. And I should know because I've lived here for well over 1,000 years. I've seen our great monastery grow to become one of the finest universities in Europe. I've seen our abbey torn down and rebuilt on many occasions. And the same with Lismore Castle. I've seen Hollywood stars dance in the castle ballroom. And in earlier times, the birth here of one of the greatest names in science in the world. I've seen laughter and tears, happy times, times of sorrow.
Brother Declan, come now. Where are your manners?
Oh, yes, indeed, my manners. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Brother Declan. Hello. And I first came to live in Lismore in the year of our Lord 636. Now, let me see, that's about 1,350 years ago. Because I led a blameless life.
Oh, come on now, Brother Declan.
Because I led a fairly blameless life, and because I like Lismore so much, I've been allowed to stay on here. In spirit, so to speak. So first of all, let me say to you, welcome, bienvenue, willkommen, yokoso, and in our own tongue, Cead míle fáilte, 100,000 welcomes. Welcome to the Lismore Experience. Now, are you wondering why I speak so many languages? Be honest now, aren't you curious? But you must remember that by the 10th century, Lismore was one of the greatest seats of learning in all of Europe. You might find it hard to believe, but at one time there were over 1,000 scholars and holy men at Lismore. Even Alfred the Great, King of the Saxons, was educated by Lismore monks. If I remember rightly, he learned to play the harp here. And St. Malachy, the great reformer of the Irish Church, came south from Armagh to study at Lismore with Malchus, the retired Bishop of Cashel. St. Cadoc of Clancarvan is said to have studied at Lismore too, until, as the annals say, he had acquired all the knowledge of the West. Now let me see, where was I? Oh yes, Lismore and how we found ourselves here. It was Easter in Rahan, 100 miles to the north, the year 636. Our abbot, Br Cartage, had fallen victim to jealousy from the monks of Clanard, and our beloved leader was expelled. He was 72 years old and had 867 monks and students with him when he turned towards the south, where the land was rich and the river full of fish. In the book of Br Cartage's life, it says, "There came to the old abbot a holy woman named Camille, who lived there. And she asked, 'What do you propose doing here, ye servants of God?' 'We propose,' answered our dear leader, 'building here a little liss around our possessions.' Seeing how large the community was, the woman observed, 'Not a little liss will it be, but a great one.' 'True indeed, sister,' responded Cartage. 'Lismore a einem tre vihe. Lismore will be its name forever.' Sadly, within a year, Cartage was dead. The great annals, the annals of Ulster and the annals of Inishfallen, have recorded the deaths of our celebrated abbots. Iarnlach in 700, Corna in 701, Collamon, Cronon, Finchou. You can see stones to the memory of some of these abbots in the old St. Cartages. And then came this terrible entry, the Annals of Ulster, 833, the burning of Lismore of Mochada and the slaughter of the men of South Munster. The Vikings had arrived. You can blame the black water for that. At high tide, the Vikings could sail upriver from Youghal to within a mile of here. They sacked the schools on the river bank and robbed the monastery. For hundreds of years afterwards, Lismore was to be a target. It attracted a great deal of unwanted attention, both from quarrelling Irish princes and from Norse raiders. But despite all this activity, Lismore had become an important ecclesiastical power. In the year 1166, 3 years before the Norman invasion of Ireland, a meeting attended by the papal legate and 12 other bishops was held at Lismore. Lismore is the flower and summit of religion down to the present time above all the churches of Ireland. High praise indeed from the life of St. Flannan. By the time the Normans arrived, Lismore had a French-trained and French-speaking abbot in Bishop Christian. Eventually, in this part of Ireland, people spoke French and Irish, and the scholars spoke Latin as well. Sure, to this very day, the way Waterford people speak is still very French. You know what I mean? Very sorry for your trouble. Sure, that's a real French accent. We didn't speak like that until the French-speaking Normans came along. Ah, yes, the Normans, those mail-coated knights and Flemish archers. The year 1169, another fateful year in Ireland's history. Raymond le Gros and Strongbow landed in Wexford during the summer of 1170. The men of Waterford crumbled before them. Then King Henry II himself landed near Waterford in October 1171. He'd come personally because he felt his control was slipping away to his own generals. He had 500 knights and thousands of archers with him. Strongbow and others, as well as the native Irish kings, submitted to Henry's royal control. Henry certainly meant business. He'd arrived with £1,000 of sealing wax, and during that winter the Irish bishops swore loyalty to the English king. Each bishop gave Henry a letter with a seal attached, confirming him and his heirs in the lordship of all Ireland. Then even the Pope himself, Alexander III, gave Henry his seal of approval. During this visit, Henry came up to Lismore and spent a couple of days choosing a site for his castle, though it was another 15 years before his son actually built it. And that brings us to our two cathedrals, both called St. Cartage, to avoid confusion. There's the Church of Ireland, the Anglican Church, and St. Cartage's, the Catholic Church. You must visit them both, of course, for a visit, for a quiet prayer. There's a chapel at the earlier St. Cartage's, specially put aside for prayers for peace. Peace between families, peace between countries, peace between religions, peace for everybody. And everybody is welcome. And while you're there, spare a thought for St. Cartage himself. You can see him on John McGrath's tomb. That's been there since 1548. He's standing next to St. Catherine and St. Patrick. And look around. It's one of the oldest church sites in Ireland. Look around and you'll see over 1,000 years of craftsmanship. Stone carving, wood carving, beautiful stained glass windows, even a pre-Raphaelite masterpiece by Edward Burne-Jones. The cathedral has seals that go back over 400 years, one as far back as 1279. It even has some church silver that somehow escaped the unwanted attentions of Oliver Cromwell when he was doing his rounds. It's a beautiful, beautiful church with an atmosphere all of its own. And just up the hill from the courthouse, where you are now, is the younger St. Cartage's, the Catholic church. It's a late 19th century building, but its style goes back centuries. To North Italy, to Lombardy, to Florence. It was opened in June 1881, and whatever your belief, you'll find a welcome there. But you can't separate the history of Lismore from the story of its great castle. Of course, what you see now is not the way it was. Most of what you can see now was built by the 6th Duke of Devonshire in the 19th century. It was started in 1185 by Henry's son John, and soon after was demolished by the Irish. When it was rebuilt, it became the bishop's residence. And that's why when the castle was being restored in 1814, the most amazing discovery was made. Treasures belonging to the church had been buried there hundreds of years earlier. What happened was this. While the builders were knocking through a wall, they found an early 12th century pastoral staff, a crozier belonging to Lismore's bishop, Neil Macmec Educain. This beautiful piece of early Christian work can now be seen at the National Museum in Dublin. And that wasn't all they found. Underneath the Lismore crozier were the unbound pages of the Book of Macáthí Griach, which became known as the Book of Lismore. The writings were in Latin and Irish, some dating back to 994. The pages contained the lives of the Irish saints, Acal of Nishan Orach, the Colloquy of the Ancients, the finest literary text of the 12th century, and an Irish translation of the Travels of Marco Polo, which he had written in jail in Genoa in 1296. So you see, we were an outward-looking community even then. There's a stained glass window in the castle ballroom that shows the history of the English families that have lived there, since it was the home of Richard Boyle, the first Earl of Cork. But the window tells only half the story. It goes back only so far. It doesn't go back to when it was the home of the bishops of Lismore. I can remember it, though. I can remember when the ballroom was the chapel. And it still feels like a chapel to me. The last bishop to live at the castle was the notorious and corrupt Meiler McGrath, written about as an avaricious and unprincipled man and a most unscrupulous waster. Not the kind of qualities we like to find in a bishop. As well as being Lismore's bishop, he was also Archbishop of Cashel. In 1587, Meiler McGrath granted the manor of Lismore and its castle to a recently arrived Englishman, Sir Walter Raleigh. And by 1589, Raleigh was rebuilding Lismore Castle as his principal Irish residence. But what was he doing here? Well, Walter Raleigh, when he was just over 30 years old, had become not only Queen Elizabeth's principal empire builder, he was also the landowner with the most overseas possessions. And in 1587 he found himself with 42,000 acres surrounding the Blackwater Valley. Much of it had come from the Earl of Desmond, who he'd helped to defeat in a rebellion 6 years earlier. His land stretched from Youghal to the Knockmealdown Mountains on either side of the river, with half a dozen castles and towns such as Cappoquin and Tallow. It was Sir Walter Raleigh who introduced the potato to Ireland, and the cherry tree. And it was Sir Walter Raleigh, too, who set up the first iron-working industry in these parts. As many of you perhaps know, the Irish for tallow, Tullach on Earing, means the hill of iron. He'd found iron ore on his estates, and with the forests that covered Ireland, made charcoal to smelt the ore. The ancient woods were levelled. The trees that were a distinctive feature of the Dacia disappeared to make charcoal for the iron industry and to build ships for the Elizabethan and Tudor navies. Truly, it was the end of our woodland. But the destruction of the woodlands was only temporary in this area. Look around County Waterford now, and you'll find it's among the most beautiful countryside in the whole of Ireland. Tree planting and landscaping by the English landowners turned the dense forests of the Dacia into an English-style landscape. But not until Walter Raleigh let go of his Irish estates, selling them to the Earl of Cork, Richard Boyle. Boyle's story is a great story entirely. He'd arrived in Ireland with £27 in his pocket, and 4 years later was buying all Raleigh's estates for £15,000. Over the next 40 years he became the richest man in Ireland, eventually becoming Lord High Treasurer. Not bad for a penniless Chancellor, as one eminent Irish historian put it. Sir Richard Boyle moved in to live at Lismore Castle in 1620. He had 7 sons and 7 daughters. His most famous child was his youngest son, Robert. Robert Boyle, the father of modern chemistry. Imagine Robert Boyle, born right here in Lismore. Surely you know your Boyle's law. Come on now. If the pressure of a given mass of air is doubled, then its volume is halved, providing the temperature remains constant. That's right, just as it's taught in classes from America to Australia, just as it's taught in Lismore. St. Cartage would have been proud of that boy, especially as young Robert was interested in religion as well as mathematics and science. When he was only 7, he could speak French and Latin as well as English. When he was 14, in handwriting like sheet music, he wrote to his father from Eton, "We continue our study in the mathematics, which is the bravest science in the world after divinity, in which I hope to become proficient." He went on to become the most celebrated scientist of his day, and throughout his life he continued to publish his own theological thoughts in books such as this one from the Cathedral Library, Considerations Touching the Style of Holy Scripture. While Robert was away in Europe continuing his education, there were troubled times in Ireland, and his father had made powerful enemies. He lost much of his fortune, but somehow survived every move made against him, until he died on September the 15th, 1643. Richard Boyle, 1st Earl of Cork, is buried at St. Mary's Collegiate Church in Youghal. In the panel next to the Boyles, on the window in the great hall inside the castle, a new name appeared. Cavendish, the family name of the Dukes of Devonshire. In 1753, Lady Charlotte Boyle, the last in line of the Boyle family, married William Cavendish, the 4th Duke of Devonshire, and the Devonshires became the new owners of the castle and its lands, which they hold to this very day. The family has certainly left its mark. The beautiful bridge that crosses the Blackwater by the castle was built by the 5th Duke to the designs of the Corkborn architect Thomas Ivory. And the courthouse was put up by him too. Lismore Castle itself was rebuilt by the 6th Duke using stone brought in from Derbyshire, from close to Chatsworth House, the English home of the family. The Lismore Castle gardens are open to the public, and I can't think of a more pleasant place to spend a sunny afternoon. I often slip in when no one's looking for a quiet moment. The present Duke and Duchess of Devonshire, the 11th, have restored and replanted the formal Jacobean garden and the relaxed landscaping of the pleasure grounds laid out by Joseph Paxton in the 19th century. All right, Brother Declan, it's time for our friends to go out from here and discover for themselves some of the things you've shown them today. Ah yes, there's the Lismore, the big fort that gave the town its name, on the back road to the east. It's down by the river there that St. Cartage and his monks settled. And you can clearly see the earthworks of the motte and bailey that the Normans defended before the castle was built. Close by is St. Declan's Way, a walk that stretches from the round hill to the beautiful seaside town of Ardmore. There's a much longer walk, not for the faint of heart or the faint of foot, that links Ardmore to Cashel, 40 miles long. There's the canal to see that the 5th Duke built in 1800. It was used to carry coal and later the stone from England for the castle. It's only 3 miles long and joined Lismore to the tidal point of the Blackwater near Cappoquin. Cappoquin of the poets, it's been called. And Cappoquin has produced many poets, from Padraig Den in the late 18th century to Thomas McCarthy in the present day. It was here too that James Joyce found a would-be lover for Molly Bloom in Lieutenant Mulvey. Cappoquin he came from, he said, on the Blackwater. And Padraig Den was a Gaelic poet, a teacher at Cappoquin School, where the Toby Drug now stands. His long religious poem, Einas an Fachaig leis an Mós, is the best known of his works. And as in the past, Lismore is still home to great writers. George O'Brien's book, The Village of Longing, is about Lismore. And Dervla Murphy, the renowned travel writer, was born nearby and lives here when she's not muddling through Madagascar or on 8 feet in the Andes or in Ethiopia with a mule. But travelling around the Lismore area, you'll find altogether much less rigorous than Dervla's travels, but interesting all the same. Follow the Villarstown Road out of Cappoquin and you'll come to the Indian Gate. It was built in 1826 and, not surprisingly, is Ireland's only example of the Hindu Gothic Brighton pavilion style of architecture. And Villarstown itself is a pretty place to visit. And up the hill from Cappoquin there's Mount Melleray, home of the Cistercian monks who arrived here in 1830. Like St. Cartage and his community, the order had to flee persecution and found a home in these parts. It was built from the stone from Mitchelstown Castle after the dreadful fire there. And there's not many views more beautiful than that of the Vee, the gap in the Knockmeal Downs where you can see Baylock Lake. It's here that the ghost of Petticoat Luce is supposed to still haunt and lure lustful men to their death in the dark waters. There are so many interesting places to visit. each one with its own story to tell. Cappoquin, Clashmore, Ballyduff, Aglish, Tallow. And you'll want to visit, I'm sure, the gardens at Lismore Castle. Both the upper and lower gardens are open for everyone. And when you cross the bridge over the Black Water and look back, you'll see a view of Lismore Castle that's changed very little over the past 100 years. Except now, it's even more spectacular at night. Breathtaking. And you can see it for miles. And if you turn left over the bridge out of Lismore and travel for 3 miles, you'll come to a most remarkable folly, and probably the finest place for a picnic in the whole of Ireland. Though having lived in these parts for over 1,000 years, you'd expect me to have a liking for the place. There you'll find, a mile off the road, a Gothic Revival lodge. And up an avenue of rhododendrons astride a cobbled stream are Ballysaggart Towers. These were built by Kylie Usher, whose wife wanted a castle to live in like her sister's place, Strancally Castle. Unfortunately, all of the money went on the lodge, the towers and the cobbled river, and there was no money left to build the house. A grand folly. It's a great family walk. There are other walks too, all marked out to help you to make the most of your visit. There's Lady Louisa's Walk, a walk that takes you high by the river, dropping down to where the Black Water becomes tidal towards Cappoquin and on towards the Old Liss. There's the Town Walk, taking you through the town and up to the old cathedral. And on your way through town, there are lots of places for cups of tea and coffee, and even more places that will welcome you for a drink of Guinness and a chat. And as you go, think about our leader, St. Cartage, who brought us all here. He brought me in 636. And now, in a way, he's brought you. So welcome to Lismore, where the past is always present. It's a grand town. And wherever you're from, and wherever you're going on to, remember I'll be with you, in spirit.
Mar liw gael gwa bo